Go ahead and tell me whether a married woman should need permission to keep a friend. I was not cheating, lying, or hiding some secret relationship. Technically, Adrian and I had ended our romance years earlier, and remaining close only proved we were mature adults. My husband called it disrespect because he could not accept that another man understood me better than he did. When I invited Adrian to our housewarming, the quiet one only smiled and tapped twice on his tablet. By midnight, every person in our new home would understand who was truly insecure. My name is Delaney Brooks. I am 34, and I manage public relations for a luxury hotel group. So of course I understand how appearances work. Technically, Adrian was not a secret, not a lover, and not a threat. He was only a man from my past who had become my closest friend, while my husband had become the quiet one who fixed bills instead of looking at me. When I invited Adrian to our housewarming, my husband only gave that small closed-mouth smile and tapped twice on his tablet. By the end of the night, everyone would see that I could not be controlled. Adrian and I had dated in college for 3 years, but we ended without betrayal or screaming. He wanted movement. I wanted stability, though I did not understand how quickly stability could feel like a locked room. We stayed connected through birthdays, and when he moved back to the city, our messages became daily. He remembered the version of me who never explained every choice. My husband remembered mortgage rates. Owen had not always been distant. Every Sunday we once drove to another small town and bought one object for the home we planned to own. We found a blue ceramic bowl and a crooked wooden sign that said, "Home," while we still rented a small apartment. When I lost my first serious job, Owen paid the rent for 8 months without mentioning it. That was how he loved me. Quietly. Practically. After his father became ill, the quiet grew heavier. Owen managed hospital visits and bills. When I tried to make him talk, he said he needed to finish one more task. By the time his father died, my husband could organize grief into folders but could not tell me where it hurt. I had watched my mother disappear inside a marriage where every friend needed my father's approval. I promised myself I would never become her. So when Owen questioned Adrian, I did not hear concern. I heard the first click of a lock. The first time Adrian and I met alone, we chose a rooftop wine bar near my office. I told Owen I was having drinks with an old college friend. That was accurate. Technically, I left out the name because I knew it would become the whole conversation. Adrian arrived smiling as if 10 years had been 10 days. He asked whether marriage had taught me to plan everything. I told him marriage had taught me that plans were useful when people used them instead of feelings. He laughed. I had missed that sound because he still reacted to me as if I were interesting. We stayed until the city lights came on. When I returned home, Owen sat near the apartment window with his tablet open. He asked whether I had enjoyed myself. I said yes. Then he asked whether the friend had been Adrian. I told him it had. His next question was soft. He wanted to know why I had avoided saying Adrian's name. I explained that old college friend was a complete description. Owen gave the small smile, lowered his eyes, and tapped twice on the screen. I asked what he was doing. He said he was updating the household calendar. Of course he was. Every uncomfortable moment became a date or note with him. Then he asked what had changed between Adrian and me. I said nothing had changed. We had simply become closer friends again. He wanted to know whether Adrian understood the friendship the same way. I said he did. Owen asked why a married woman needed private evenings with a man she had once loved. I told him secure adults did not erase their past to protect someone else's insecurity. He meant that he was afraid of losing something inside our marriage. I heard a man asking me to surrender part of myself. He went quiet, and I treated that silence as proof that my answer had won. A week later, Owen took me to see the house he wanted us to buy. It had pale floors, tall windows, and an empty living room facing the yard. Fresh paint hung in the air. Owen placed a brass key tied to a dark green ribbon in my palm. He said his father's inheritance would cover most of the purchase and that he wanted this to become our permanent home. For a few seconds, I saw the man from those Sunday drives. Then my phone vibrated. Adrian had sent a photograph of the rooftop bar and asked when we were meeting again. I turned the screen down. Owen saw it, but he did not ask. He only smiled, opened his tablet, and tapped twice. I assumed he was making another list. I closed my fingers around the key. That evening, I sent Adrian a photograph of the living room and told him he would have to see it after we moved in. Adrian and I began meeting once or twice a week after that. Sometimes it was coffee near my office. Sometimes he waited in the hotel lobby until my shift ended, leaning against one of the marble columns as if he belonged there. He always asked about me before asking about work, which sounds small until you spend years beside a husband who begins every evening with a question about insurance, repairs, or the mortgage. Of course, Owen still cared. He just cared like the practical one. Adrian cared like someone who remembered that I had once been spontaneous. The first time we spent an entire Saturday together, Adrian said he wanted my opinion on 2 restaurant spaces he was considering. I told Owen I had a work event. Technically, it was connected to work because Adrian wanted advice about branding, and branding was part of my profession. We walked through both locations, had lunch, then stayed for drinks because the second owner wanted to discuss possible investors. By the time I returned home, the apartment was dark except for the lamp beside the dining table. Owen sat there with 2 covered plates and his tablet open. He asked whether the event had gone well. I told him it had been longer than expected. Then he asked why the receipt from Marlowe had appeared in our shared expense account at 10:47 that night. I looked at the tablet. The restaurant name, amount, and time were displayed clearly. He remembered that I had told him the hotel's regional director was keeping the team late. I said plans had changed. Adrian needed help with a presentation, and the dinner had become part of the discussion. Owen asked why I had not simply said I was meeting Adrian. I told him because every mention of Adrian became an investigation. That was the gap between us. He meant that I had given him one story while living another. I heard a man demanding a report of my movements. Owen reminded me that he had waited with dinner for 2 hours because I had said I was coming home. I told him that waiting had been his decision. His face tightened, though his voice stayed calm. Then he gave that small closed-mouth smile and tapped twice on the tablet. I asked whether he was keeping some kind of record now. He said he was only organizing the household calendar and expenses. I laughed because the idea of my husband turning one dinner into a file seemed more sad than threatening. The next morning I met Cassidy at a bakery near her apartment. She listened while tearing a croissant into small pieces and said Owen sounded insecure. She reminded me that Adrian had known me before marriage, before I became responsible for a house, a family schedule, and someone else's comfort. Cassidy always understood why control frightened me. We had grown up watching our father choose which friends our mother could see and which clothes were too much for a married woman. I told her Owen had asked me to stop meeting Adrian alone. Cassidy said a secure husband would not need that rule. I agreed. Then she asked whether Adrian still had feelings for me. I said of course not. She asked whether I had feelings for him. I said no again, though the answer needed more explanation than the first one. I did not want to leave my husband for Adrian. I did not picture a different house or a second marriage. I only liked the way Adrian looked at me when I spoke, as if I was still the woman who once got into a car without knowing where the road ended. Later that day, Priya joined me in the hotel break room. She had seen Adrian waiting in the lobby twice that week and asked whether Owen was comfortable with how often we met. I gave her the cleaner version. I said my husband was struggling with an old friendship and turning it into something romantic because he did not trust easily. Priya asked whether I had hidden any of the meetings. I told her that privacy and secrecy were not the same thing. She said they often looked similar from the outside. I reminded her that I managed public perception for a living. She replied that perception became harder to control when the facts remained unchanged. I did not appreciate the comment, so I ended the conversation by checking my phone. Adrian had sent a message asking whether I wanted to see another restaurant space that evening. I said yes. When I met him outside the hotel, I told him about Owen's request. Adrian smiled and said my husband clearly saw him as competition. I told him there was no competition because I had already chosen my life. Adrian asked why I sounded disappointed while defending it. That question stayed between us as we walked. I explained that Owen had become emotionally absent after his father's illness. He fixed things, paid bills, and made plans, but he never asked what I wanted my life to feel like. Adrian said he remembered the old me. He reminded me of midnight drives, cheap motels, and mornings when we decided our destination after entering the car. He offered nostalgia without asking what it would cost. That was why talking to him felt easy. When I returned home, Owen was packing boxes for the new house. Each one had a room name and a list of contents written along the side. I stood in the doorway and told him Adrian and I had discussed everything and would remain friends. Owen stopped folding newspaper around a glass. He asked whether Adrian now had a vote inside our marriage. I said that was not what I meant. He told me he was not asking to control my entire life. He was asking for distance from one relationship that had already started taking honesty and time away from us. I said he was making friendship sound like betrayal because he could not accept that another man understood me. Owen asked whether being understood required lying about where I was. I told him one changed dinner plan did not define anything. He said it was not one dinner. Then he named the rooftop bar, the Saturday restaurant visit, and 2 late calls I had taken outside. The dates came easily to him. Too easily. I asked whether he had memorized my schedule. He smiled and tapped twice on the tablet beside the boxes. Of course, I assumed he was trying to make himself feel important by collecting details. I told him friendships did not require his approval. He looked at me for a long time, then said he would remember that answer. I left him standing among the boxes and went upstairs to message Adrian. The next step was simple. I would keep seeing him, and Owen would eventually learn that my independence was not a subject for negotiation. The new house gave me more reasons to spend time with Adrian because every room needed a decision, and he had opinions Owen never seemed interested in offering. My husband cared about measurements, delivery dates, and whether the shelves were attached to the correct wall supports. Adrian cared about how the rooms would feel when people entered them. That was the difference I kept explaining to myself. Technically, I was not replacing Owen's opinion. I was simply asking someone who enjoyed the same things I did. The first real problem happened at a home decor store 3 weeks before we moved in. Marcus came with us because I wanted him to photograph the finished house later, and I thought including a mutual friend would make the afternoon easier. Owen spent 20 minutes comparing curtain materials while I stood beside a display of pale linen panels. He said the thicker curtains would block more light and keep the rooms cooler. I said the dark fabric made the house look like an office. Before he could answer, Adrian called. I switched to video and turned the phone toward the display. Adrian immediately chose the linen curtains. He said they looked lighter and more expensive. I laughed and told Owen that at least one man understood design. Marcus gave a short laugh, but it ended when he saw my husband's face. Owen asked whether Adrian needed to approve every decision in our house. I told him Adrian was only helping because he had taste. Then I added that Owen had other qualities. He was stable, careful, easy to train once someone understood how his moods worked. The words came out like a joke because I smiled while saying them. Marcus looked down at the cart. Owen did not raise his voice. He did not walk away. He turned toward Marcus and asked whether he had heard what I said. Marcus answered that he had. My husband gave the small closed-mouth smile, opened his tablet, and tapped twice. I told him not to make the moment strange. He said I had already done that. Of course, I assumed he was trying to embarrass me by acting wounded in public. I placed the linen curtains into the cart and continued shopping as if the choice had been settled. On the drive home, Owen kept both hands on the steering wheel and said nothing for almost 10 minutes. I asked whether he planned to punish me with silence for the rest of the day. He told me he was trying to understand when making him look weak had become part of my friendship with Adrian. I said nobody was making him look weak. If he felt embarrassed by a harmless joke that came from his own insecurity, he reminded me that he had asked me privately to stop using him as entertainment. I said Marcus knew I was joking. From the back seat, Marcus stayed quiet. Owen asked him directly whether the joke had been funny. Marcus said it had made him uncomfortable. I turned around and asked why he had laughed then. He said he had not known what else to do. That irritated me because people often laughed first and became moral later, once they sensed which side looked safer. I told them both the conversation had become ridiculous. The practical one returned his eyes to the road. That was his quiet debrief. No shouting, no accusation. Just enough calm to make me look like the loud person even when I was only defending myself. 2 days later, Adrian came to the unfinished house with takeout. Owen had gone to the hardware store for cabinet handles, and I had been painting trim since morning. Adrian said I sounded tired, so he arrived with food and 2 bottles of sparkling water. We sat on the living room floor between unopened boxes. The house smelled of paint and sawdust, and the linen curtains were still folded in plastic near the wall. Adrian looked around and said I had made the right choice. He could already see the room filled with people. I showed him the brass key Owen had given me. It still hung from the dark green ribbon because I liked the way it looked around my wrist. Adrian asked whether Owen knew he was there. I said I did not need permission to invite a friend into my own home. Then I lifted the key and told him nobody controlled who entered a house that belonged to me too. Adrian smiled and said that sounded more like the woman he remembered. We ate from the same container because most of the kitchen items were still packed. When Owen returned, he stopped in the doorway. He looked at Adrian's jacket hanging over the new green chair, the open food box between us, and the key swinging from my hand. His expression changed for 1 second. It was not anger. It was something quieter, the kind of sadness that asks for no audience. I saw it, but I told myself it was jealousy because jealousy was easier to dismiss. Owen placed the hardware bags near the stairs and asked Adrian to leave so he could speak with his wife. Adrian stood slowly and wanted to know whether there was a problem. I answered before my husband could. I said Owen was still learning how adult friendships worked. Adrian gave me a small smile, collected his jacket, and said he would call later. Once the door closed, Owen asked whether I had invited Adrian into the house without telling him. I said it was my house as much as his. He asked whether I remembered what the key meant when he gave it to me. I told him it meant I lived there. He said it meant he trusted me to build a home with him. That sounded dramatic for a piece of metal, so I told him not to turn a key into a marriage speech. His jaw tightened. Then he said the problem was no longer only Adrian. It was my need to prove, again and again, that he could not stop me. The sentence landed too close to something I did not want named. I stood and carried the empty food container toward the kitchen. I said he was creating a story in which he was the patient husband and I was the selfish wife. He replied that he did not need to create the story when I kept performing it in front of other people. I turned back and told him he was twisting ordinary moments because he wanted evidence that I was doing something wrong. He gave that closed-mouth smile. Then came the 2 taps on his tablet. I pointed at the screen and said his little habit of writing things down did not make him powerful. He said he had never claimed it did. The answer annoyed me because it left nothing to fight. The next morning, Marcus sent me the photographs from the decor store. He included the curtain displays, the furniture, and 1 picture of Owen measuring a table. Every photograph from Adrian's video call was missing. I asked why. Marcus said the moment had not looked good. I reminded him that his job was to make things look better. He said sometimes photographs should not repair what happened in front of the camera. I told him he was taking Owen's side. Marcus said he was not taking a side. He simply did not want his work used to make my husband look small. After that, his replies became shorter. A message that once received an answer in 5 minutes stayed unread until evening. I noticed the change, but of course I blamed Owen. He had always been good at making his silence feel like a moral position. That weekend, I made the guest list for the housewarming. I added family, co-workers, neighbours, and every friend whose opinion mattered. Then I typed Adrian's name. I placed him near the top, before Owen's mother, and before Marcus. When my husband saw the list, he would understand that the friendship was staying. More importantly, everyone else would see that his private discomfort had no authority over my public life. Eleanor arrived at the house 2 weeks before the party carrying an old wooden box against her chest. She did not call first, which irritated me because I had planned to spend the afternoon arranging the dining room, but of course Owen's mother had never considered schedules important when they belonged to someone else. The box had belonged to Owen's father. Inside were photographs, folded letters, and a small metal measuring tape he had carried through most of his working life. Owen sat on the unfinished fireplace ledge and held the tape in his palm. He turned it over twice without speaking. For once, there was no tablet beside him and no list waiting to be completed. Eleanor watched him with the careful expression people use around someone who refuses comfort. She asked whether we were happy in the new house. I said technically we were not fully living there yet, but everything was coming together. She did not ask about the curtains or furniture. She asked about us. I said of course we were fine. Owen lowered his eyes toward the measuring tape. Eleanor then told me that he had started visiting her every Tuesday evening. He spent hours in his father's workshop, sitting at the old workbench without repairing anything. That detail did not fit the man I lived with. The practical one did not sit without purpose. He fixed, measured, and organized. I asked why he had never told me. Eleanor said he had probably tried in the only language he knew. I told her silence was not a language. She agreed. The answer caught me without a defense because I had expected her to protect her son. Instead, she said Owen's habit of withdrawing had damaged our marriage. She said he believed doing things for people was the same as letting them know him, and it was not. Owen did not argue. His thumb moved along the scratched metal case of the measuring tape. I looked at him and saw the man who had once driven 3 hours because I said I missed the ocean. For a few seconds, the room became smaller and quieter. Then Eleanor said, "My friendship with Adrian was not a cure for Owen's distance." She said I had started using another man to punish my husband for failing to speak. I told her nothing physical had happened. She said betrayal did not begin with bodies. It began when someone protected an outside relationship by making their spouse look unreasonable. Owen finally looked at me. No anger, only that tired expression I had seen when he found Adrian sitting on the living room floor. I almost told him that I understood. The words came close enough for me to feel them behind my teeth. That evening, after Eleanor left, I sat alone in the bedroom with my phone open. I typed a message to Adrian saying we should stop meeting privately until Owen and I repaired things. The message stayed on the screen for almost a minute. Then I remembered my mother standing near our front door while my father explained why one of her friends was a bad influence. I remembered how every restriction had begun as a reasonable request. If I sent the message, Owen would believe his boundary had worked. Next time, he might object to someone else, then a dress, then a job. I deleted the message. Technically, Owen had never done any of those things, but control always needed a first success. The next morning, I offered him a compromise. I said I understood that my meetings with Adrian had created tension, so I would stop excluding Owen. Adrian could remain my friend, but we could all spend time together. Owen stood beside the dining table checking delivery times on his tablet. He asked whether I expected him to sit beside a man I had used to insult him and call that healing. I said including him was the mature solution. He told me forced inclusion was not intimacy. It was pressure with witnesses. I accused him of rejecting every solution that did not end with my obedience. The quiet one set the tablet down. He asked whether I would continue seeing Adrian if he clearly told me our marriage could not survive it. I said a husband who loved me should never force me to choose. Owen replied that I had been choosing for months. He gave the small, closed-mouth smile, picked up the tablet and tapped twice. Of course, he wanted the last word without raising his voice. That was how he made every argument look settled. I walked away before he could add anything else. 2 days later, I returned from work and found Marcus sitting with Owen on the back patio. A folder of printed photographs lay between them, and Marcus's camera bag rested near the door. They stopped speaking when I stepped outside. I asked why Marcus had come without contacting me. He said Owen wanted help organizing pictures for the housewarming. My husband said they were sorting photographs from the renovation and our years together. I assumed he was finally taking an interest in how the party would look. I also assumed he needed Marcus because Adrian made him feel socially weak. Marcus had always belonged more to my circle than Owen's, so seeing them together almost amused me. I told them not to use any construction photographs where I looked tired. Marcus said he would choose carefully. His voice was polite but flat. On the table, I noticed one photograph from the decor store. Owen was standing beside the curtain display while my phone was raised toward Adrian. I reached for it, but Marcus placed the folder closed. He said those pictures were not for the party slideshow. I asked what they were for. Owen smiled and tapped twice on the tablet. He said they were only organizing memories. I accepted that because I had more important things to prepare. At the hotel the following afternoon, Priya asked me to speak privately in an empty meeting room. She had seen photographs of Adrian and me online. One showed us at the rooftop bar. Another showed him leaning close while we reviewed restaurant plans. Nothing in the pictures was romantic, and I said so. Priya replied that one image could be harmless, but the same two people appearing together every week created a pattern. I reminded her that I controlled public perception for a living. She said perception became difficult to manage when the facts kept repeating. I told her she was allowing Owen's insecurity to affect her opinion of me. Priya said Owen had never discussed our marriage with her. That made the warning harder to dismiss, so I dismissed her instead. I said co-workers should not comment on private friendships. After that, she spoke only about work. Cassidy's replies had also become slower. Marcus no longer answered group messages with jokes. Eleanor ignored 2 calls from me and returned only the one about the party schedule. Each change was small enough to explain. People were busy. The move had made everyone tired. Owen had probably been sharing his wounded version of events. Adrian remained available, and that made him feel like the only person who was not asking me to shrink. One evening, he came to see the completed living room. The linen curtains moved near the windows, the brass lamps cast warm circles across the walls, and the green chairs finally stood around the dining table. Adrian said the house looked like something from a magazine. I told him the party would prove that Owen and I were secure enough to welcome every part of my life. Adrian asked whether my husband had agreed to his invitation. I said he had seen the guest list and had not removed the name. Silence counted as acceptance when it suited him, so it could count when it suited me. I carried the seating cards to the dining table and placed Adrian's beside mine. Owen's card went directly across from us. Adrian laughed and said the arrangement might be uncomfortable. I told him discomfort was sometimes necessary when people needed to learn. Then I adjusted the 3 cards until they formed a perfect straight line. Owen found Adrian's name on the final guest list 6 days before the housewarming. He stood beside the dining table holding the seating plan, while his tablet rested near his hand. He asked whether I was truly inviting my former boyfriend after everything we had discussed. I said Adrian had already accepted. Technically, the house belonged to both of us, so I had the same right to choose the guests. Owen pointed to Adrian's card beside mine and asked whether placing him directly across from my husband was also innocent. I told him it would prove that mature adults could share a room without jealousy. He said the party was meant to celebrate the home purchased with his father's inheritance, not become a stage for humiliating him. I answered that respect worked both ways. For years, the practical one had hidden behind bills, repairs, and schedules. After his father became ill, he stopped speaking to me like a husband and expected responsibility to replace intimacy. Owen did not deny it. He admitted that grief had made him withdraw and that he had failed me emotionally. Then he offered one final solution. He would attend counselling and stop disappearing during difficult conversations, but I had to cancel Adrian's invitation and end our private meetings while we repaired the marriage. Of course, his offer still included a condition. I told him therapy could not make control become trust. He asked whether protecting Adrian mattered more than saving our marriage. I said a loving husband would never make me choose. Owen gave the small closed-mouth smile and tapped twice on his tablet. Then he said Adrian could come. He even suggested inviting everyone whose opinion mattered to me. I heard surrender. I expanded the guest list to more than 40 people and finished my toast about freedom, trust, and women refusing to lose themselves after marriage. Marcus refused to photograph the speech because he said it sounded like public punishment. Priya warned me not to turn the party into an argument. Cassidy read the draft and said Owen was not our father. When I accused her of becoming afraid of conflict, she stopped replying. The night before the party, I sent her a photograph of Adrian's place card beside mine. The message showed as read, but no answer came. On the afternoon of the housewarming, Owen tested the television and charged his tablet. Small white cards rested beside the guest book. When I asked what he was preparing, he said he was organizing memories from the previous few months. I assumed he had finally created the renovation slideshow. Later, he carried 2 suitcases into the bedroom and said he was putting things in order. By 7, the house was full. Cassidy's chair remained empty, but Marcus, Priya, Eleanor, and almost every other guest arrived. Adrian came late with an expensive bottle of wine. I hugged him at the entrance where everyone could see. Owen welcomed him calmly and took the bottle from his hand. No argument. No objection. I touched the brass key tied around my wrist and smiled. Every person whose opinion mattered was now inside. All I needed was the toast. Dinner ended shortly before midnight, and the guests moved into the living room with their glasses. Adrian sat beside me on the green sofa, while Owen stood near the television, calm and quiet. I lifted my glass and spoke about freedom, trust, and women refusing to disappear after marriage. Then I looked directly at my husband and said, secure men did not fear old boyfriends. Nobody laughed. I raised the brass key from my wrist and said, nobody decided who entered my home except me. Owen stood straighter. He gave the small closed-mouth smile and tapped the remote twice. The television turned on. A white page appeared with the words, "Just Friends" at the top. Beneath them was the date of my first rooftop meeting with Adrian. Owen explained that I had called Adrian an unnamed college friend until he asked directly. The next page showed the Marlowe receipt from the night I claimed to be working late. Then came the decor store photograph, my phone raised toward Adrian while I called Owen easy to train. Marcus quietly confirmed that he had heard every word. I said the images had been removed from context. Priya asked what context made the restaurant lie necessary. Her voice was neutral. My explanation stopped before it reached my mouth. More pages appeared. Group messages showed that I had invited Adrian because I wanted everyone to see that Owen could not stop me. The dates, the tablet, the 2 taps, and the questions asked in front of witnesses were no longer habits. They were a record. Owen said he had not collected proof of an affair. He had collected the moments when I changed the story. Adrian stood beside me and asked whether I had used him to punish my husband. I told him Owen was manipulating the room. Adrian asked again. When I did not answer, he removed the spare key I had given him and placed it on the coffee table. He said he had believed our marriage was already over, then walked out alone. I looked for Cassidy, but her chair had remained empty all evening. Owen placed my brass key beside Adrian's. He told me the suitcases upstairs contained my belongings. The separation petition and request for temporary possession of the house would be filed on Monday. My hotel room became my home for the next month. My personal savings lasted 6 weeks because most of my income had gone into decorating the house. Marcus stopped answering anything except necessary messages about mutual friends. Adrian blocked my number after 3 explanations. At work, Priya received the next reputation campaign instead of me. I told myself I had invited Adrian because no husband had the right to choose my friends. That was still true. But I had not brought him there only as a friend. I had brought him as proof that Owen could not control me. Everyone saw the proof. They simply saw something different from what I had planned. The brass key remained on the table inside the house I had opened to everyone except my husband.